I would say that there's a lot in here that has come to pass. And specifically, if it wasn't obvious, the anonymous transaction systems. And he talks about how an anonymous transaction system is not a secret transaction system. This very much describes the way Bitcoin works, right? Because Bitcoin is a completely transparent blockchain that is open and available for anybody to see, but it is also provides anonymity when used in a certain way. Welcome to the Sovereign Computing Show, presented by ATL BitLab. I'm Jordan Bravo, and this is a podcast where we teach you how to take back control of your devices. Sovereign computing means you own your technology, not the other way around.
This episode is sponsored by ATL BitLab. ATL BitLab is Atlanta's Freedom Tech hackerspace. We have co-working desks, conference rooms, event space, maker tools, and tons of coffee. There is a very active community here in the lab. Every Wednesday night is Bitcoin night here in Atlanta. We also have meetups for cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, decentralized identity, product design, and more. We offer day passes and nomad passes for people who need to use the lab only occasionally, as well as memberships for people who plan to use the lab more regularly, such as myself. One of the best things about having a BitLab membership isn't the amenities, it's the people. Surrounding yourself with a community helps you learn faster and helps you build better. Your creativity becomes amplified when you work in this space. That's what I think, at least. If you're interested in becoming a member or supporting the space, please visit us at atlbitlab.com. That's atlbitlab.com. All right, on to our show.
Welcome to the Sovereign Computing Show. I'm Jordan Bravo, and I'm recording here today in ATL BitLab in the heart of Atlanta with Stephen DeLorme.
What's up?
We want to announce to everybody that we have a new show feed. Previously, we had the Sovereign Computing Show under the ATL BitLab podcast feed, but we are excited to announce that the Sovereign Computing Show now has its own dedicated feed. So you can find the Sovereign Computing Show in any podcast player, Spotify, Apple, etc., everywhere else. You just search for Sovereign Computing and it will be the first result. It will have the image or the icon will look like a microchip. And you should be able to find it now. You can also find that on Fountain FM, that's fountain.fm. You can boost into that show. So we hope that you will use the new feed and that you will find it easier to search for. However, if you would like to have all of the ATL BitLab podcast episodes, that includes the Sovereign Computing Show, as well as two other feeds, which contain live events that are recorded here at ATL BitLab, as well as the Behind the Build show, which features Stephen DeLorme interviewing software developers on what they're building in the Bitcoin and related space. Anything you want to add on that?
Nope, I think they pretty much covered it.
Okay. Today, we are going to talk about the Cypherpunk Manifesto. And for those of you who have not heard of or read the Cypherpunk Manifesto, or maybe you're just rusty on it, this is an incredibly important piece of digital literature. This was created by Eric Hughes back in 1993. Thank you. Back in 1993. And since this is an audio show, primarily, we want to make sure that people listening are not given second-class treatment here. This is not one of those YouTube shows where you have to be watching. I'm going to read it out loud for you. And so please sit back and enjoy the Cypherpunk Manifesto by Eric Hughes. Privacy is necessary for an open society in the electronic age. Privacy is not secrecy. A private matter is something one doesn't want the whole world to know, but a secret matter is something one doesn't want anybody to know. Privacy is the power to selectively reveal oneself to the world. If two parties have some sort of dealings, then each has a memory of their interaction. Each party can speak about their own memory of this. How could anyone prevent it? One could pass laws against it, but the freedom of speech, even more than privacy, is fundamental to an open society. We seek not to restrict any speech at all. If many parties speak together in the same forum, each can speak to all the others and aggregate together knowledge about individuals and other parties. The power of electronic communications has enabled such group speech, and it will not go away merely because we might want it to. Since we desire privacy, we must ensure that each party to a transaction have knowledge only of that which is directly necessary for that transaction. Since any information can be spoken of, we must ensure that we reveal as little as possible. In most cases, personal identity is not salient. When I purchase a magazine at a store and hand cash to the clerk, there is no need to know who I am. When I ask my electronic mail provider to send and receive messages, my provider need not know who I am speaking or what I am saying or what others are saying to me. My provider only need know how to get the message there and how much I owe them in fees. When my identity is revealed by the underlying mechanism of the transaction, I have no privacy. I cannot here selectively reveal myself. I must always reveal myself. Therefore, privacy in an open society requires anonymous transaction systems. Until now, cash has been the primary such system. An anonymous transaction system is not a secret transaction system. An anonymous system empowers individuals to reveal their identity when desired, and only when desired. This is the essence of privacy. Privacy in an open society also requires cryptography. If I say something, I want it heard only by those for whom I intend it. If the content of my speech is available to the world, I have no privacy. To encrypt is to indicate the desire for privacy, and to encrypt with weak cryptography is to indicate not too much desire for privacy. Furthermore, to reveal one's identity with assurance when the default is anonymity requires the cryptographic signature. We cannot expect governments, corporations, or other large, faceless organizations to grant us privacy out of their beneficence. It is to their advantage to speak of us, and we should expect that they will speak. To try to prevent their speech is to fight against the realities of information. Information does not just want to be free, it longs to be free. Information expands to fill the available storage space. Information is rumor's younger, stronger cousin. Information is fleeter of foot, has more eyes, knows more, and understands less than rumor. We must defend our own privacy if we expect to have any. We must come together and create systems which allow anonymous transactions to take place. People have been defending their own privacy for centuries with whispers, darkness, envelopes, closed doors, secret handshakes, and couriers. The technologies of the past did not allow for strong privacy, but electronic technologies do. We, the cypherpunks, are dedicated to building anonymous systems. We are defending our privacy with cryptography, with anonymous mail forwarding systems, with digital signatures, and with electronic money. Cypherpunks write code. We know that someone has to write software to defend privacy, and since we can't get privacy unless we all do, we're going to write it. We publish our code so that our fellow cypherpunks may practice and play with it. Our code is free for all to use worldwide. We don't much care if you don't approve of the software we write. We know that software can't be destroyed and that a widely dispersed system can't be shut down. Cypherpunks deplore regulations on cryptography, for encryption is fundamentally a private act. The act of encryption, in fact, removes information from the public realm. Even laws against cryptography reach only so far as a nation's border and the arm of its violence. Cryptography will ineluctably, thank you,
I don't know.
spread over the whole globe, and with it the anonymous transaction systems that make it possible. For privacy to be widespread, it must be part of a social contract. People must come and together deploy these systems for the common good. Privacy only extends so far as the cooperation of one's fellows in society. We, the cypherpunks, seek your questions and your concerns and hope we may engage you so that we do not deceive ourselves. We will not, however, be moved out of our course because some may disagree with our goals. The cypherpunks are actively engaged in making the network safer for privacy. Let us proceed together apace. Onward, Eric Hughes, 9th March 1993.
You didn't read his email, hughes@soda.berkeley.edu.
Ah, yes. I wonder if that email still works.
I don't know. We should try it.
Yeah, maybe we should email him and ask him. So this manifesto underpins a lot of what we, the descendants of the first generation of cypherpunks, hold dear and have as our world goals. I would say that there's a lot in here that has come to pass. And specifically, if it wasn't obvious, the anonymous transaction systems. And he talks about how an anonymous transaction system is not a secret transaction system. This very much describes the way Bitcoin works, right? Because Bitcoin is a completely transparent blockchain that is open and available for anybody to see, but it is also provides anonymity when used in a certain way. And it allows people to selectively reveal themselves, right? Because I can reveal that my transaction that my identity is associated with a given transaction. But if I choose not to do that, then I can transact anonymously. The other thing he talks about is we should only give the necessary information, reveal the necessary information for any transaction. So for example, when he talks about purchasing a magazine at a store and handing cash to the clerk, there's no need to know who I am. So similarly, you might have heard in previous episodes, we talk about when you transact online, you want to be doing it with giving the minimum amount of information possible. Some privacy respecting service providers will have this out of the gate, out of the box, requiring you to do no additional work. Something that comes to mind is Mullvad, the VPN provider, or iVPN, the VPN provider, where they give you, when you sign up for their service, they give you just an account number, which is a character string, and you don't need anything else. You don't have to give them an email. You don't have to give them any kind of identifying information. So that's the minimum amount of information required for a transaction. And if you're using, in that case, if you're using Bitcoin to transact, again, you are not giving them a credit card information, identity, any of that stuff. So that's a perfect example of an ideal transaction that takes place digitally, right? One side is providing a digital service and the other is providing a digital currency in exchange for that service. And no other superfluous information has to change hands. Any thoughts so far on this, Stephen?
Yeah, so I think it's worth taking a step back from this paper for a minute and giving a little context to people who maybe never heard of this stuff before. Like, your reaction to this paper will, vary depending on, how you feel about privacy and all that, I think. For some people, it sounds a little suspicious, maybe, like a little like, no, that's not the word I'm looking for. I think to some people, this might come across as paranoid if you're not familiar with this line of thinking, but I think we had to put ourselves into like the headspace of the author and kind of like the people he associated with, and also the time period that this took place in. So this was in the early 90s. And, we're kind of at this point in human history where the personal computer is still relatively new, especially personal computers with like desktop operating systems. And the web itself, like the ability to go to like a website like http www.whatever.com, that way of using the internet, that's relatively new. It's only existed for about 2 years at this point. So this is like very, very new technology, and this kind of like this new way of thinking that like, oh wow, in the future, every single government in the world is going to have computers, and every single company is going to have computers, and they're going to collect information on everybody. Like they're thinking ahead. Like that's the cypherpunks basically. This group of people, they're thinking ahead to the future when every organization has computers and they're collecting lots of information. And they're saying the idea that an individual can also have a computer now, a personal computer, and they can kind of use that as a tool to defend themselves from these organizations. And, it sounds paranoid when at first glance, but then when you actually think about it, they were actually pretty correct about the way that the world works. Obviously there's tons of government data collection, but there's also tons of corporate data collection. And especially when you think about just as an example, when you get into like elections in the US, there's always, debates about like, well, is Twitter only, banning people on the right, or does Google have a political bias, or like, did you actually want to buy that? Or have you been kind of like, has, Facebook targeted ads been like working you for 6 months? Well, the only reason we can even have, debates like these, or the only reason we are having debates like these is because it's true that these organizations have tons of data about us. So, while it may have sounded paranoid to people at the time, it actually ended up being correct. And so, kind of loosely organized group of people on the internet here, Eric is calling them the cypherpunks in his paper, and he's kind of outlining the philosophy of this group and what motivates them and what they plan to do about this problem.
Yeah, thanks for that context. Sometimes I forget people may not even have heard the word cypherpunk before, so.
I have another little historical thing I meant to go into.
Yeah, please.
Like another thing, this seems kind of weird because, he talks about cryptography a lot in the paper. And one thing that we all forget about is that cryptography was at one point illegal. It was it was a government, it was seen as like being like a government tool. And this seems weird, if you've, grown up with smartphones, because it's like, well, obviously it has encryption. There was like a little padlock that appears in the corner of the browser when you go to a website. Actually, I take that back. There isn't. There used to be, but a lot of browsers no longer even surface that because it's just expected that all web communications are encrypted, right? Like it used to be that having an encrypted connection to a website was a special thing. Now it's seen as a default, and being unencrypted is they let you know when it's not encrypted. Everyone kind of expects that their Apple messages are encrypted to some degree. You always hear these news articles about the FBI, having to work really hard to try and hack iPhones to get people's iMessage and all that kind of stuff. Obviously, everybody's talking about, as we've talked about before, you can't fully trust iMessage, but the point is that in the modern day, we have this expectation to some degree of a certain level of encryption. This wasn't always the case. That's because when you look back in the history of cryptography, I'm going to paraphrase here a little bit, a lot of what we know about cryptography kind of began, or at least with computer cryptography, began during World War II. Began during the 40s. The Nazis had this tool, the Enigma machine, this, mechanical device that was used to try and, come up with, I guess I don't know if you'd call it like a rudimentary encryption key, but, a way for, for their military to be able to encrypt messages. And so the Allied forces, have Bletchley Park, and they have the this is where Alan Turing worked. And there was this, movement to try and build, what were really early computers. It's like, how can we use technology to break the enemy's technology, right? And so after World War II, cryptography and these early computers were, made for encrypting things and trying to break other people's encryption. And so this was seen as military technology. And so you enter this era of the personal computer, like late 80s, early 90s, and suddenly you have people trying to, and these are the cypherpunks, they're trying to write encryption software that could run on a personal computer. And this was very, very controversial at the time because, there was actually, accounts you'll hear on the net of like, people holding a cryptography conference and like, thinking, well, that guy in the corner is like a plant from the NSA or something. And this sounds a little paranoid, but you have to put it in historical context. At this point in time, these things were seen as military weapons. It's like this whole, kind of, part of the cypherpunk mythology that it's like, well, the encryption software was illegal. And if you were to, share a floppy disk with this encryption software, you were transporting a munition in legal terms. And so that's where, people were trying to kind of, come up with these resistance things like, well, if I tattoo the encryption algorithm on my body, does my body become illegal? If I put it in a book or a t-shirt that, might be like subject to some kind of free trade, rule or something like that, does it, is it no longer a munition? And, and nowadays, all of this, seems like, well, obviously encryption, people should have encryption, but, if it wasn't for this movement of, digital activists called the cypherpunk, it might be that, this knowledge would, still be locked away, hidden from all of us today.
Thanks for that historical context. And one more thing is it culminated, you could say, in a landmark case in the 90s where the Supreme Court of the United States ruled that encryption and software is actually treated like speech. And so that they could not forbid it under that classification. And so I think that's sort of the start of when encryption started becoming available to everybody. Previously, like you said, it was highly controlled and it was a military and government tool and weapon, you could even say. And now suddenly this powerful technology is available to anybody that has a personal computer.
And he kind of predicts this in the paper too. And he says, we don't much care if you don't approve of the software we write. We know that software can't be destroyed and that a widely dispersed system can't be shut down.
Yeah, exactly. And jumping forward to 2008, when Satoshi Nakamoto released the Bitcoin white paper, that is, so jumping from 1993 when this was written to 2008, you could see the Bitcoin white paper was putting into practice many of these same cypherpunk goals that are listed right here. What is it? 10, 15 years prior?
Yeah, it took, I guess, about 15 years for them to finally invent electronic money.
And something that for people who are Bitcoin geeks out there and have studied this history a little bit, you'll know that even though Satoshi released the Bitcoin white paper in 2008 and the first Bitcoin software in 2009, it did not come out of nowhere. It was built on all of this privacy and encryption technology that had been worked on for decades, right? So you had the first public-private key cryptography came out in the 1970s with the RSA algorithm. So that was absolutely essential for Bitcoin to be invented. It wouldn't work without that kind of cryptography. And then you had hashing algorithms that was over the next several decades in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and proof of work as well, which was invented in the 90s as well for basically an anti-spam prevention.
Hashcash.
Yeah, Hashcash by Adam Back. And so you had, it was really a culmination of decades of cumulative research by all of these cypherpunks and cryptographers, and by bringing these things to the open source world where anybody could work on it, you had the possibility for an anonymous person like Satoshi Nakamoto to use all of these available tools and to put them together in a unique way and invent something that nobody had been able to invent up till that point, which is digital money.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's like Satoshi, nobody knows who Satoshi is, and it doesn't really matter at this point if you ask me, but it's like, it seems like Satoshi was, and must have been inspired by these conversations. Like, maybe Satoshi was somebody who was on the cypherpunk mailing list, and that's another kind of point is like this manifesto, I think, was originally shared on the Cypherpunk mailing list. And so there was a lot of conversation and about this kind of stuff. And, that's where a lot of these people would hang out on.
I'd like to fast forward to today and talk about the echoes or the mark that this manifesto has left on us. And you and I would say, are kind of, we're similar age. We're certainly younger than Eric Hughes and probably younger than Satoshi, although we can't know for sure. But just based on when you and I have started our careers and got into software, I think it might be accurate to say we're sort of second generation cypherpunks, or sort of following in their footsteps as we continue to push forward both Bitcoin, building on top of Bitcoin, and all of the sovereign computing software that we use and spread and work on and promote. And it's all in the name of a similar ethos that is described here, which is privacy as a right, the ability to selectively reveal oneself to the world, and the use of encryption technologies for everybody.
Yeah. Well, I hope I'm a second generation cypherpunk. Maybe not. You're right. We're certainly second generation from them. That brings up an interesting point, which is a famous line here: cypherpunks write code. And I definitely wrote code. I always identify primarily as a designer, but I've definitely written a ton of front end code and, some back end, a smattering of back end code here and there. And I think this definition is interesting. I'm trying to think if I've ever directly worked on I guess I have written code that has gone, I've definitely written code that real users use. So, but it's interesting when you think about it, because they're very strict about that kind of definition, I think. And some people interpret this line a little bit more broadly these days of just someone who just generally likes and, cryptography and privacy and stuff. You can call yourself a cypherpunk. Some people are a little more strict about that definition. They'll say, no, you're not a cypherpunk unless you write code. I think it's interesting because I think there's a little bit of wisdom in the stricter definition, because the way I interpret a lot of the cypherpunk philosophy is like this. It's you can have your opinions about what you think a government or a company should do, and that's fine. You're welcome to have your opinions, but at the end of the day, it kind of doesn't matter what you feel about what they should do, because they're going to do whatever they're able to do, right? I think he kind of says something to that effect at another point in here. One line is it is their advantage to speak of us, and we should expect that they will speak. To try to prevent their speech is to fight against the realities of information. So it's the kind of philosophy is that this kind of negative state of the world where third parties will try to collect information on you and will try to use that against you. It's not something that your thoughts and feelings will really change. And so the conclusion I think that they've come to is that the only way to, the only path forward from that is to actively defend yourself, to digitally defend yourself. And the way that you digitally defend yourself is using cryptography. It is encrypted, it is crypting your messages. It is verifying your identity to, being anonymous where possible, verifying your identity via the use of digital signatures. It is using anonymous electronic cash systems. It's all of these different things. These are ways that you actively fight to claim your privacy, and you actively work to conceal yourself. And so that's why I think the cypherpunks write code line is that it's that being cypherpunk, I think in their eyes, is more than just I'm interested in this, or I feel this way about something. It's I'm actively doing something, and I'm actively kind of asserting my will via the code that I write.
Totally. And if you want to take a stricter definition of the cypherpunks, maybe it was only these particular guys that wrote that kind of software. and maybe those who do so today, you could say, we here are following in the footsteps of the cypherpunks. We are championing that ethos and benefiting from the work that they've done. But in any case, I think we can say that we want to push forward this idea.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I wanted to repeat a line that you had referenced. We cannot expect governments, corporations, or other large, faceless organizations to grant us privacy out of their beneficence. And I just want to repeat, I want to focus on that because it's worth concentrating on the fact that if we just sit back and don't care about our privacy, corporations, governments, and other organizations, it's not in their best interest to care about our privacy and to grant us privacy and to act in our best interest that way. So they're not going to. The only people who will are us. So if we don't do it, no one will. And I think that's important to remember when people sometimes ask, why bother going through all of this trouble? Why do you do a weekly podcast on this? Why do you go through the extra steps required to make your devices more private, etc.? And that's part of the reason, because nobody else is going to do it for us.
Yep.
Another part I want to focus on is where he says that, I'm looking for the spot now, so apologies for the pause, but I'm looking for the part where he talks about how it's not bound by nations. Here it is. Even laws against cryptography reach only so far as a nation's border and the arm of its violence. Cryptography will I still don't know what this word means.
I've got to look that up.
Ineluctably spread over the whole globe.
Guys, dude's got a vocabulary. Not to be avoided or escaped, inevitable.
Okay, so it's cryptography will inevitably spread over the whole globe is what he's saying.
Ineluctable.
Ineluctable.
Thank you. Thank you for that. So what he's saying here is governments can make laws and regulations on cryptography, but because cryptography is information, it's not going to be bound by any nation-state borders. I mean, governments will try to enforce it, but ultimately it's really difficult, even with the power of the most powerful nation states in the world. It's almost impossible for them to enforce these regulations and laws on cryptography, because how do you put down a wall for something digital, right? How do you prevent something from leaking out across the internet? Well, you might say China tries to do just that, but we know that their Great Firewall of China is not airtight, right? Things leak in and out all the time. So and China, of course, has a very totalitarian approach. We here in the West don't have that. Okay, we had a recording equipment failure and we lost the last 10 minutes or so of the discussion, but we are going to continue on now with the boost segment. We got a boost from Gavin Green for 100 sats, and Gavin says, it does indeed. It does indeed. Gavin was referring to a previous boost by me, Jordan Bravo, and I was sending in a test boost just to see if it was properly displaying my name when I hooked up my Nostr profile. And for those of you who don't know, you can, in Fountain, connect it to your Nostr profile. You just paste in your npub, and it will show your name and your avatar, for those of you who want to link the two up. If you want to boost in, you can do so with fountain.fm. You can do that on iOS or Android, or you can do it through the Fountain FM website. You can also email us, sovereign@atlbitlab.com. And Stephen, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, and if you have issues boosting, because sometimes with Fountain and other podcasting 2.0 apps, you need to use a special kind of Lightning wallet that not everybody has, and it can be a little frustrating. So if you just want like some regular Bitcoin payments and you want to support the show, you can go to atlbitlab.com and click on the podcast link and the header nav bar. It's just /podcast is the URL. There is a send a tip button underneath the podcast description. Also, if you click on any episode, there's a big orange send us a tip button. Those buttons just go to our BTC Pay server. It accepts regular old Bitcoin over Lightning, nothing fancy, on-chain Bitcoin. That might be a little bit easier for you than the Fountain Boost. So yeah, if you do want to support the show, send us a tip, you can always go there if that's easier for you.
Yep, and that's atlbitlab.com/podcast. All right, thanks everybody. We'll see you next time.
Later. Hey, thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you want to learn more about anything that we discussed, you can look for links in the show notes. That should be in your podcast player, or you can go to atlbitlab.com/podcast. On a final note, if you found this information useful and you want to help support us, you can always send us a tip in Bitcoin. Your support really helps it so that we can keep bringing you content like this. All right, catch you later.